All right, I'm going to show you guys how to pose this character in a convincing way, and also some of the mechanics of posing a character like this one, so that you can do your homework assignment. The three different poses that I want you to use are in the assignment write-up. Typically, these are going to be for any kind of animation class: an emotional pose, a physical pose, and maybe something in which they're interacting. Those are just typical ways to practice if you want some additional ones on your own, but I'm not going to tell you what they are because you got to go read the assignment. I am going to do a first sort of casual relaxation of this pose, just to show the difference between the very stiff and formal T pose, and then I'm going to try to make him look over his shoulder even though he doesn't have a face, to show that mostly body language is the important thing when you're posing a character. So first of all, just know that you can drag around the entire character to get all of their controllers selected and just hit the S key. And immediately, having done that, you've bookmarked essentially this pose by putting a key on every single channel of every visible controller. So long as the visible controllers are all the ones you're going to use, that's all you have to do to save a pose for the character. Easy as that. Okay. You do want to sometimes make sure that everything's set correctly, but for these three rigs that I'm providing, I've already gone through and made sure that all of their various body parts are showing the correct bits and all of the correct control schemes are active. So you don't really have to worry about that too much. Just zoom out, grab everything, hit S, and you're good to go. So I'm doing that on frame 1. All right. So first of all, this pose is pretty stiff and doesn't really make a lot of sense for a human being. You can pose like this yourself, but it would take some effort to kind of stiffly hold your limbs out like that. The very first thing I almost always do is drop the center of gravity a little bit until the knees start to buckle, which gives us a bit more leeway with reaching the feet towards the ground and making them position in different places. If I don't do this, then we're already stretching out the legs and they're hyperextended and their knees are locked perfectly straight, which if you've ever done that, maybe as a kid or something, you know that sometimes it can make you lightheaded or even pass out. My little brother passed out when he was a kid because he locked his knees in, I think, a choir or something like that, and it can be pretty dangerous. So we want to drop the hips a little bit more towards the ground. It doesn't take much, like that's enough just to get the legs slightly bent, but if you want more leeway in where you can put the hips, then a little bit more than that. The second thing to realize is that the center of gravity is rarely ever centered directly between the 2 feet like this perfectly. It's usually going to lean over one side or the other in order to gain a little bit of comfort, because the stress that it puts on our hip joints is pretty substantial, especially if you're not in motion. So it tends to look a little bit feminine if you go a bit too far, but it's very natural to have your center of body over like one of the insteps of the foot at least, if not even further than that somewhat, just not directly in the center. There's a bad habit in animation posing called twinning, when you have symmetrical halves of the body. It's something to be avoided. We're looking for an interesting pose that isn't just everything exactly the same left and right. Of course, this is now different because I didn't move this handle, but we're going to start with the lower part of the body and then move our way to the upper part of the body. Looking at the feet, there's also the problem that both these feet are facing straight forward, which is another pretty unnatural thing. Typically, your feet are going to angle out at least a little bit, kind of like that. And you can see already, without even looking at the upper part of the body, this feels more casual. It feels more comfortable. We've got the center of the body over one of the insteps of the feet. We've got the feet turned out slightly. It's already feeling a bit better. Beefy, this character, is nice because you can lock the knee controller to the foot so that as I move the foot around, the knee also swivels. In general, you want the knees to kind of line up in the toe direction. If I start to move this away from the toe direction like that, that doesn't look impossible, but it starts to look like there's tension in the leg. And if I move a little bit further, like over here, now it starts to look very uncomfortable. So there's a tolerance there, but not very big. If I do the opposite to the outside, that looks possible, maybe a little bit odd. But if instead I just rotate the foot with that knee following, all of these positions look plausible and comfortable. Okay. Now you don't want to rotate all the way over to 90 degrees because of what's happening in the hip at that point. If you were going to try to get your foot over there, you'd have to bring the knee back a little bit in order to compensate, but now it looks very, very odd, like a particular ballerina pose or something. So a little bit of fanned outward feet, but not extremely. I've moved this green foot further away from the center line because it's the one that's slack. We have the weight over this side, and so this one would be more slack, and I could slide it out a little bit as well to kind of enhance that feeling of being somewhat casual. All of this has been with just sliding the root around. I haven't even rotated anything yet, so just to get an idea that this can be accomplished fairly easily. It would be a little unusual in a relaxed pose to have either one of these legs perfectly straight. That starts to say that this is a character taking up a pose on purpose or about to do something dynamic like shift their weight. I would prefer most of the time to have at least a little bit of supple bend in the legs. However, this one's probably too bent right now. It looks like he's putting a lot of pressure on that knee. So let's start to get some tilt in the hips. We could bend the entire upper body like this, but we have an inbuilt controller which allows us to isolate the hips. So let's go ahead and try to use that one first. With regards to left and right, whichever leg is the one supporting your weight will usually have the higher hip, usually, not always. So if I do this just a little bit, that's what's being indicated by the position of my hips. They're over this leg, so this one would have the higher hips, and you can see the difference is very, very subtle. Bend it over here. But the leg just straightens out a little bit, and then this one just bends a little bit more, and that's it. And so we've got one high butt cheek, one low butt cheek, one high hip, one low hip. That tends to be a lot more natural. Okay, and I know that the controllers are a little bit distracting, but you can kind of see that the hips are indeed bent. This one, it makes it look like they're still straight. So try to ignore the curves if they're not following the part that you're trying to look at. With regards to front and back, it's typical for the butt to stick out just a little bit like this, especially feminine. If you're going to have a more feminine character, the butt's going to lean more forward, or the pelvis is going to lean more forward, the butt will lean more backward. And for men, that's less common. If you have poor posture, then you can reverse this and hunch the back. But whatever the pelvis is doing, usually it's going to lead into the spine and indicate what kind of curve the spine is taking on. Beefy is kind of cool because I can move this top bit, but you'll notice that I'm not really getting any curve in the body by doing that. So unfortunately, I have to use the spine controllers and that top bit, or let's see if I can just use the spine controllers. I can use just the spine controllers all on their own. So first I'll use those. So by lifting this hip up, I've angled this in this direction to the right, which should mean that the spine will want to bend the opposite way to compensate for that. This is the idea of contraposto or counter posture, right? If you've got this high on this side, this is being supported, this low, then this shoulder would be low and this shoulder would be high a little bit. Is that 100% concretely always the case? No, but that is the general way that your spine works. Think of it as a flexible rod, and that if you're going to compress one side, both those 2 points will come together, shoulder and hip, or apart, shoulder and hip. Okay, so just a little bit of bend. At this point, even though I've moved the hips, I'm not feeling that there's quite enough, so I'm going to move them a bit more, drop this just a little bit more, and grab the spine again. And let's see, bend it a little bit more. So what we're kind of limited by now is that I'm not moving this primary controller. I'm not moving it into a new position. So I'm kind of limited in the pose that I can get. And even bending this more and more and more, it still doesn't really feel like this is tilted over. So I'm going to go ahead and tilt it, move it down, and then I could probably relax this one just a little bit in order to get a better starting position for that pose. I want to always rotate around and check the positions that I'm getting as I'm posing. Do I need to move it back a little bit? Do I need to move it up? In this case, yes, I need a straighter leg on the support leg, but not perfectly straight. And now I've got kind of a waiting for someone impatiently kind of pose on this lower body. I'm going to move it a little bit closer to that side just to get a bit more, maybe a little bit less. It is a male character, and so I don't want to make it too sassy, and that can happen really easily. So we have these three, and right now there's a bend, so it's like 1 or 2 degrees is what it's saying, but remember that this bends, this accumulates throughout all three. So whatever number it says over here, if you're posing them all at the same time like I do, multiply it by 3. So 2 times 3, we've got 6 degrees, right? If I do something like this, 6 times 3, so we've got like 18 degrees of bend. Let's see if that bears itself out. Can I get 90 degrees on those shoulders? So like, yeah, about 30 for each times 3, and at about 90 degrees compared to this one. So that bears itself out, just to make sure. So yeah, he's looking kind of like a fashion model at this point because I've bent it a bit too much. So I'm going to bring it back just a little bit to be a bit more casual. And then we can start to look at the forward back bending and the twisting. Okay. So if your hips are leaned forward, your spine is bent back. This guy has a natural bend in his spine, just how it's built. And I could do something like this and lean the waist forward a little bit. But now he's sort of looking like, I don't know, he's sticking his butt out for some reason, which is kind of odd. A more slovenly kind of posture would be to bend this forward into a C bend, but then you're going to have to counter rotate the hips backward like this. So now it looks like maybe he's staring at his phone or something like that, like he's hunching his shoulders over. It's probably a bit much, going a little bit exaggerated. That's another thing that can happen while you're posing, is that you can keep bouncing back and forth between too much and too little. I always recommend go a little bit too exaggerated and then be forced to bring it back because you went too far, rather than never go far enough and never get enough character. So I'm going to bring this back just a little bit like that. We may want to think about the forward-backward positioning of the hips. It would be typical to have them centered like over the balls of the feet, like over here, except this character's got so much upper body that that's probably not necessary. A lot of his center of mass is starting to move forward anyway. But let me slide him just a little bit forward like that so that it's centered over the balls of the feet, which is what would be typical. And taking one more look around. So this is good enough. We've got kind of a bend side to side. We've got a bend forward. I'm not feeling very good about the overall rotation of the body. So what would likely happen is the center of the pelvis would rotate to face kind of the average of these two feet most of the time, unless you were doing something very particular. So a little bit of right rotation makes sense here. And I think it's probably still a bit too exaggerated. So I'm going to bring that back, this back a little, and then unbend his back just a tiny bit. 1, 2, 3. Notice each time I am grabbing all three of the spines because they work as a unit. We can also rotate, but at this point it's getting a little bit hard to tell what's happening with the arms kind of locked up in that position up there. So I'm going to try to pose the arms a little bit more realistically before I fine-tune this body position. So I'm kind of just getting the idea first. So he is feeling a little bit casual, but he's also feeling a little bit tired at the same time. I'm going to bend his hips forward a little bit more, his body a little bit back, right about there, I think. And something's weird about this slack leg, I feel. It's possible that we need to move it backward or forward. It's also something that happens. I could take this supporting leg, move it backward or forward. I think maybe forward on this one and backward on this one feels a bit better. Keep in mind, it's very likely that you should use reference either of yourself standing, a friend, actors, that sort of thing, because this can make it a lot more clear what it is that you're trying to achieve. I'm kind of doing this blind right now, which is a bad idea and kind of an amateur move. But I want you guys to use reference and get in the habit of using reference as much as possible. The first thing I do whenever I get into trouble with a pose is to stand up from the desk and do it myself. So keep in mind that that is a completely normal thing to do, and it will help a lot. So I'm putting these arms down by his sides just initially. Not going to worry about the fingers or anything happening there, but just trying to get a good overall arm position to begin with. And what we can do, we can also like lock these to the hips if we want him to like place his hand on the hip and sort of brace it there. The place that he would be putting his hand on his hips, though, it would be this one, because that's the high hip. So if he is going to put a hand on the hip, it's going to be this one that's going to be locked over here. And you'd have to be familiar with how hands interact in that way. Usually you cup the webbing of the thumb around the hip like this in order to get the pose. So something along these lines. And then the elbow is going to have to swing this way outward because of that posing. And you can see right now that's not working at all because the wrist is at a very, very awkward place. So I have to lift the wrist upward. There we go. More like this, probably out a bit further, and have him reach with his fingertips and thumb a bit more. It's even likely that the wrist sometimes does this, where it's angled upward rather than downward. But this character is so exaggerated that it's hard to get enough room to do that more typical pose. So I'm going to do something like that. Let's get this hand relaxed down. Initially, just going to rotate it downward. And I always rotate it a little bit forward like this. This 45-degree angle is a bit more natural. I'll just have him. So he looks impatient, his body language says, but not angry or sad or anything. He just kind of looks like he's waiting for instruction, like the bus is late or something like that, which is pretty good. It's kind of a neutral kind of emotion, even though it's specific in terms of his sort of body position. So here we've got a pretty good working model of our basic pose, and you want to keep rotating around and fine-tuning, but don't obsess over any one area initially. I've got the basic legs, I've got the basic arms at this point. I should move on to the head and neck and shoulders and then come back and see if there's anything that I can do to improve these areas so that the whole pose works all together at once. We haven't yet done anything that brings these feet off the ground. So we haven't done any foot tilting like that. We haven't done any ball to heel or anything. It would make sense if we wanted to indicate that he had been tapping his foot. We could do that, or to get the heel off the ground is a very, very common thing, even with static poses. So having the supporting foot just a tiny bit lifted off the ground, like he has just shifted his weight, makes sense. But we're going to leave that for a moment. Let's do the shoulders. So for this one, where he's got his hand on his hip, when I do it, my shoulder initially moves upward, maybe a little bit forward because it has to. So I'm going to scoot this up. That already feels a bit better. And in his case, maybe a bit backwards because he kind of needs the space. This shoulder then can come a little bit forward, I think, just to kind of counter that one. Although we've twisted it to the right, so maybe that's the wrong choice. That could be part of why that pose with the hand on the hip doesn't look right, is the amount of shoulder rotation. So if I try to rotate the shoulders back to here and then move the elbow back here, does that feel better? I think maybe, no, I think I want it the other way. I want it to rotate this way with the elbow further forward so that we're countering. Oh no, I'm actually thinking backwards. I'm looking at where the feet are positioned. I do want to counter the legs in this position. So, sorry, I'm going back and forth with this, but this sometimes happens, especially when you're first trying to pose your character. I am going to rotate further this direction so that his chest is rotating a different way from his pelvis and feet. That should help give a little bit more dynamic interest to the pose. So I'm going to move the elbow back. That I think enables me to slide the hand and wrist back a little bit. It enables me to bend upward a little bit eventually. Don't worry about fitting this too tightly to the waist. Wait until you've got a really solid pose before you need to do that. I'll go ahead and rotate this back further, like that. Not too much. Okay, so right there. So now that means this arm can be suspended a little bit in front of the body. Like this. And it will probably be bent inward and kind of hanging loosely like that. And that's looking okay. All right. As far as the neck and head, there's a lot of stuff you can do with the neck and head. I mean, right now it's following the spine, which makes sense, but the neck can bend and flex in different directions, and so can the head. In the case of this character, he doesn't have much of a neck, but it's important to still allow it to control the position of the head. Even though we can't really see it, it's sort of the base rotation point that it's controlling. And then your actual skull can do quite a lot of stuff independent of the body. I mean, obviously it's where we're looking. It's where our attention is first gotten if you hear something or see something. So I'm going to act like he's waiting for the bus. The bus is over to the right. So I'm going to rotate his face and head to kind of just lean like this. All right, so let's see, where did I put the neck? I think I will let it rotate a little bit further to the left along with the rotation of the body, but I'm moving not just the direction of where the nose would be, but also letting the top of the head continue to lean away and moving the nose up a little bit. So it's like he's looking way off down the road, waiting for something, mostly with his eyes, not so much with his nose. Okay, we are very good as human beings with puppets and with stick figures of sort of editorializing what the eyes and face would be doing. And so I kind of like the idea that he's not fully looking in this direction. He's sort of looking over here, but we could imagine the eyes are the thing that are glancing down the road like that. He's sort of rotated away from that position, which is kind of good. Like he definitely hasn't seen the bus. He's not in full alertness. He's just sort of casually keeping an eye out in that direction for the bus. He could even be holding up like his hand in a I'm checking my phone kind of posture, or I've just checked my phone recently and glanced up from it kind of thing, which is kind of cool. I don't have an object in that hand, but we could easily do that. I can just make a little rectangle to put in the palm. In fact, let's do that as an example because one of the poses is lifting something. And so I want you guys to be able to be comfortable parenting things to the hand. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a polygon primitive cube. And that's it. I'm not going to model anything additional. I'm just going to get it in the rough proportions of a phone for this guy, which is fairly big because he's fairly big. So something like this is probably going to be okay for his particular body. And I also want to try to parent this to this hand controller. That is not in animation how we would typically do it, because once you turn this off, the phone will be turned off once it's parented. We use constraints, but for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to parent it. I want to place this in the hand as neatly as I can and then parent it. So the grip is going to be fairly important. I've got a phone right here on my desk, so I'm going to pick it up, put it in my hand. I have my thumb tracking along one side and my fingers cupping it, but it's being gripped by the pad of the thumb on one side. So I grab this. Okay, come on, there we go. The thumb pad, is that moving the thumb pad? It didn't really move the thumb pad very much, but we'll just act like the thumb pad is here. I have my thumb. Let's see. This one definitely goes backward. So this one must go a little bit more forward. This one needs to go a lot more forward. I guess this one backward then. Kind of like this, and probably less here then. So kind of just along the side of the phone. Definitely this was, in my hand, a bit further this way. And the phone itself kind of going up in this direction a bit. Move it up. I'm kind of free-form posing this phone right now, so it's a little awkward but I think you'll kind of get the idea here. And then I had the fingers spreading and gripping along the opposite side. So I'm going to move this one down here. Pretty much leave that one as it is, I think. Does this guy have palm grip is what I want to know. Oh, he does have palm grip. Okay, so the palm was actually cupped more like this, which changes quite a lot of this and means that I have to rotate my hand back down. So I do want some palm cupping like that. There we go. All right, let's move this. I want this to actually be in local mode. I don't know if you guys know to do this, but if I hold down W, which is the movement key, and then left click, you can make this relevant to different parents. So world parent is Y is directly upward, but local or object parent would mean that the Y on this phone goes like this, and X is left and right, and Z is towards its own depth. Sometimes it can be really helpful to change. In this case, I want to slide the phone up and down, left and right. And so I really wanted to change the orientation of those axes in order to help me. Okay, so that's very helpful. I'm checking the rotation of the phone. Let's get this thumb closer. Slide the phone upward, like that. And let's get the fingers engaged now. I do have a big mitten, so it's a little bit harder to imagine the individual fingers, but this will be good enough for this purpose. Let's just cup the whole thing like that. And then this finger, sometimes I notice, sometimes that finger could just be on the back of the phone, and sometimes it actually wraps around the phone. In my case, I sort of nestle the bottom corner of the phone into the pocket of my palm right there. So I kind of put the corner down here somewhere. Let's rotate just a little bit more. And then my index finger is somewhere back on the rear of the phone. So we'll just have that modeled as well. Kind of like this, and then I'll bend that finger back a little bit. So you can see how that's sort of engaged now, that thumb. Or that index finger. I don't really feel that the other fingers need that. They're just sort of cupping. But now, if I take a step back, it does feel much more like he's actually legitimately holding that phone. Might not be perfect, but it's probably as good as I'm going to get in this really quick demo, and I would noodle it endlessly if this was an animation. I want to be very careful, especially if he was going to do something with that hand, like hit a button or transfer it to a pocket. We'd want to be real careful. But let's just take that and let's parent it to the mitten just by hitting P. So child parent P. Now if I move the mitten, the phone moves too. So we don't have to worry about the exact position I chose for the hand, only the fact that the phone is in the hand. I actually kind of like the position I chose just coincidentally, but now I could move it any old place I wanted to. Here's the downside. If I turn off the arm geometry, that stays visible. And if I hide the mitten itself, it looks like maybe they've disabled visibility there, but if I do it here, it should be fine. There we go, that's fine, show NURBS curves. But if I was able to hide these objects, these controller objects, then the phone would hide too, because now it's in its hierarchy. So in this particular rig, it doesn't appear to be an issue, but sometimes it could be. Okay, so I've got the phone held out somewhat away from his body, but down. It is still angled up towards his face. I could have it like this, or this. Let's see. See, this is like he's about to put it away. And this is like he just checked it, but is not currently looking at it, which I kind of like more. If I lift it up higher, I'm going to revert back to world mode for my movement controllers now. If I hold it up higher, this is like one moment before he looked at this phone. And maybe that's better. It's a little bit more active. I've got the arm lifted up higher. away from the more complicated body and the other hand. That feels a bit nicer. Let me see if I put it back down. There's some charm to this lower position too, but I think I kind of like the higher up position like this one. And then we want to play with the elbow. We could have the elbow held more tightly to the side of the body. We could have it further out. In terms of how widely spaced your arms and elbows are, you want each limb to be visible, but the further away from the body you put things, the more confident and broad and gregarious it tends to look. And the more tightly you control things and push them right next to the body, the more protective and afraid they tend to look, just as a part of body language. I could lift this up. That one's already lifted forward. I'm feeling pretty good about this pose here at this point. I'm not quite sure about the positioning of the hips. Now, notice that the hands are not moving with the hips anymore. I never did parent this to the hips, but I probably should. I'm going to turn that on. You can see the orientation just changed a bit, but we can change it back. So now and that looks very sassy. If we move the hips around, that hand will stay put. If we move the root around, it should stay to the hips as well. This other hand doesn't really need that treatment. It's just hanging out free. But I could just parent it to the chest like that. And now I do need to move again. But since I've done that, if I were adjusting the body slightly, that hand would stay relevant to the chest and make it a little easier to maintain that relationship between the head and the chest. In this case, I don't think I would do that because maybe I want to move the chest around and leave the hand there. Also, a free hanging hand out in space shouldn't really be parented to any body part. It would create animation problems. So let's just not do that one. This one I will leave and lock. I didn't fine tune this hand position, and also it moved once I locked it. So let's go ahead and try to do that now. When I put my hand on my hip, the palm portion tends to face in towards the body like this, and it cups the waist between thumb and forefinger. So we're going to try to do that. This character's body proportions kind of make it a little challenging, but we're going to try to get like this webbing of the thumb facing into the waist there. This necessitates opening up the thumb a bit more, probably dropping the thumb a bit as well. Let me check the cupping of the palm, which I didn't do last time. Could probably use a little bit. Could probably use quite a bit, actually, to get a nice bend in that. And now I have to significantly move this controller again. Kind of a pain. Okay, move it in, move it back a little bit. Something like that. And I want to think about where do I want the wrist angle to be. This is okay. That's a pretty severe wrist angle, but as long as I rotate this a little bit to the side, I think it'll be better. Oops, I'm losing track of which. There, a little bit to the side like that helps it out a bit. All right, I'm going to move it just a little bit further away. And let's try to get the fingers doing the right thing. So this first joint, I'm going to move up, then bend down, then bend down. This one, we really don't need like fingertip pressure. It's just sort of relaxed. So I'm going to leave it as that kind of curl. And then for the other fingers as well, they're sort of going to do the same thing. But again, a mitten means that this is a little bit harder to visualize than normal. Just kind of relaxing the fingers down. That's kind of good enough. Let's see. Yeah, that's kind of good enough. That feel okay. I think that's all right. The thumb is the big missing piece at the moment. So let's get the thumb. And for some reason, I feel like we're missing a joint on this thumb. There should be a rotation from almost the wrist to this point. And I can't move this position. Like this position would need to move. It's not just a rotation. So I feel like we're missing out a little bit. Like I want to scoot it over there. unless there's some controller I'm not seeing, which I don't think there is. But this happens with rigs sometimes. You don't always get every single control that you would want. I'm going to, in order to compensate for that, slide the hand back just a bit further so that that thumb can get free. Because I don't want to bend this thumb like backwards. That's going to look hideous. Yeah, see, that doesn't look right at all because the thumb is not able to come flush with the wrist, which is what it would need to do. So I just got to do my best, really. I'm going to bend that back, bend this forward, bend this forward as well, kind of like that. So that light kind of hooking shape is what I'm looking for, but I need, ideally it would be somewhere like there, but it needs to be centered further back. So right now I'm not able to really get this, so we've got to make the best of it. I'm going to rotate this hand back up a little bit, slide it down, shift it backward even further, maybe even rotate this direction. Yeah, really tough to get this just right. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I could do to compensate for this? Like place the thumb in a different position, because this is not working. I could try to make it have tension over here, more tightly gripped to the side, but it's not really gonna work there. Well, it looks good from the front, but then you can see that the joint is going inside the body back here. If you run into a situation like this where you absolutely have to, that's okay. Just do your best, but ideally we would want to, I guess that's probably the best I'm going to get right there. And then I'll just have to relax the fingers down further. Take a step back, look at the pose, judge whether or not it's even close to reasonable, because instead of bracing against the hip, I could choose something else entirely. I do think that's probably the best choice though. And the way I'm doing it, although it looks broken back here, looks okay from the front. So I'm going to just judge that that's going to be the best we're going to do. Maybe if I rotate it, let's see, like this. Yeah, it's really just going to look crazy in most directions. So I'm going to put that back. It's okay, it looks bad from the rear. And I'm going to relax these fingers down further to account for the fact that I had to move the palm so far away. I'm going to bring that fingertips up just a little. So he's almost just gripping with fingertips on that hip net right now, but that's okay. Elbow angle looks fine. I think it's lined up with the palm, which is generally what it should be. If I move it out further, it's okay. If I move it back in, it's worse. Okay, so we do want it here or further. I'm going to put it right about there, I think. He's a big guy, so having his elbows thrown out makes sense. And then I just want to play with the shoulder a little bit to see. Down helped a little bit. I'm going to push it down just a bit. Shoulder on this side, can I lift it up further and move the hand and elbow out? I'm making this guy take up a lot of space with his elbows, but he's this beefy, bodybuilder kind of character, so kind of tracks. I don't really like that. Let's move that elbow back. I like this one, this more casual straight angle, because he's got one side poking outward, one side flat, and then on his legs he's doing the opposite, one side flat, one side poking outwards. Creates kind of an S-shaped rhythm with his body, which is kind of nice, although his chest is doing the opposite thing. Okay, so hopefully by there I've noodled and agonized over this enough to see how much work you can put into your poses and still have work left to do. You can do a lot. You can go for hours sometimes posing a single character, figuring out exactly what's going to work for them. Try not to do that. Don't agonize over it endlessly. Try to just get it as close as you can initially, check out the various pieces, see if you like it. I'm pretty happy with this kind of waiting for the bus pose. Keep in mind, initially I keyed everything. I could do that again if I'm paranoid and just hit S one more time, but I can see that everything's red. I've got the tick mark down here, and I've actually got auto key on right now. So all of that is saved. Okay. What I should be able to do is go to frame 10 after having keyed everything, grab all of these pieces minus the phone. I don't want to grab the phone, so I'm going to grab everything, and then I'm going to hit Shift-click on the phone geometry. Hopefully that deselected it. And I should be able to key everything and enter in zeros to every available field. Sometimes if your fields aren't available, these are just rotates, we're not going to get everything. So I have to make sure that the last thing selected had translates. So let me deselect the hips or the root controller and then reselect it. And now with everything still selected, I can hit 0. And you can see it returns back to basically his T-pose. And so now I have the T-pose and my phone pose right here. I don't know what just happened with that arm. It's a bit odd that it looks shaded, but I have both my poses saved. Okay, here's my nice fresh starting position where I don't have any of the body language that I just had. And I've got my checking my phone position. You don't have to do this when you're animating a character. In fact, I would recommend not doing that. That you should start from the previous pose on your next one so that you can imagine the progression of a body part moving from that pose to the next one. But in the case of posing these broad, disconnected poses, maybe you do want to reset it all and then proceed. At this point, I also don't want to be seeing the phone. So I'm going to key the phone and turn off visibility. So that should mean that when I come back to here, here's the phone. When I go up to frame 10, the phone is no longer there. I don't have to worry about it. Okay? So that's a nice way to get props to turn on and off as well, at least for this assignment. Okay, so I said I was going to try to make him look behind him. I'm not even sure if that's necessary because we got him to look to the side here, but let's just give it a try. I want to imagine that this character saw, or let's say heard, something behind them. So what would I do to pose that? I'm going to make it something kind of protective that I probably need to stand up and do this myself. I know I don't have a camera on me, but I'm going to just imagine that I'm looking behind me or hearing behind me. What I do is I put one leg backward, sort of half turned, and then rotate my shoulders in the same direction, and I'm leaning away from the danger. So I'm leaning forward. Kind of think of like a Scooby-Doo kind of sneaking motion. So let's try to do that. I'm going to first get my foot back and rotated because that was a big feature of what I just acted out. I'm going to drop my hips. Okay, and we want to try to get slightly rotated in that direction, but not a lot. Most of the job's going to be done by the shoulders, and we're definitely leaning forward a little bit here. Although this guy is so beefy, it's hard to judge sometimes. I had my shoulders rounded over and rotated around and definitely bent as well. So all three of those things like that. You can see that it's looking a bit bizarre so far. It's okay. We're going to try to fix things up. This foot, I think for him, needs to come forward a bit. Knee needs to come forward a bit. And then I definitely had my weight over the forward foot. So it's possible that this foot, although it can go backward, I might want to tilt it a little like that, or get it on the ball of the foot. Let's rotate it back forward, bring it backward. So it's as if he were just moving and then paused and planted that front foot in order to swivel around and rotate his shoulders backward. Let's try that. I don't know what's going on with this knee controller. Let's get it free out here just a little bit. Sometimes the knees will go in the opposite directions, even when you're rotating around. Sometimes they can go in the same direction, but usually that's only for mid-action stuff. So I would keep this either straight or to the right. Chest is okay. The neck and head are going to play such a big part of this. I want to try to pose them immediately. I'm going to go up and around the neck. And then for the head, the most important part, I think, is that it needs to be nose up and kind of tilting back that way. I'm trying to imagine this without the arms. I think the neck choice I made was wrong. There's the neck. The neck choice, I think I need to go this way and forward. There we go. That feels better. More in line with what the chest is doing, so that the head can get to this almost able to see the eye from the back pose, because he's peering over this shoulder. All right, let's keep moving and see if I can get the rest of the body parts to make sense. I'm going to hunch both the shoulders this time because it's sort of a fearful thing, a nervous thing. So both the shoulders are going to come upward. The arm where I was looking backwards was kind of almost doing what his arm is doing now, but I'm going to lower it just a bit, get the hand into a more realistic kind of position like this. But he's like reaching around behind himself with that arm. I'm also going to rotate the shoulder backwards, so it's both hunched up and back. There we go, something like that. And then this one's doing something crazy. This one I had reaching in front of me. Rotate it around this way. So here's an important note. Once I get around to the front here, this arm came from a side position over here. I want to rotate this way to get into position, not that way or some other way. You can create really bad gimbal lock problems or false rotations in your animation if you don't follow a logical progression from one place to another. And I know that we're not posing this from one valid pose to another, but if you just look at what happens as I go from frame 1 to frame 10, that's a decent translation from one point to another. But if I did something, for instance, like this, then now it makes no sense how he's getting from one place to another, but arguably that's the shortest path, right? So just be aware of that. In this assignment, it's not really important, but as we move forward, it will become more important. So in this one, I think I need this arm to be a little bit further out to the right. I need the elbow, for sure, to be a bit further forward, because he's just heard something like that. It would make sense to have the elbows tighter in. Let's see if I can make the elbows tighter in. Actually, that looked a lot better. As soon as I tucked that elbow in, it looked a lot more fearful and hesitant. This one, let's see if I can get the same kind of treatment. Look how much more scared he looks suddenly by tucking those elbows in a little bit. It really helped. And it's subtle, but it's the kind of thing that you will feel rather than kind of consciously think about. But body language is a big part of animation, so you want to keep in mind that's your domain. It's something that you got to think about. Now, I never really rotated the center of the body forward or backward or left and right or anything, and I could probably stand to do that, but I'm hesitant. I'm thinking, what should I do? Because that doesn't look right. That looks like more balanced. I think it's more like the other way. I want to bend this direction further forward. But now his balance is completely off. His huge, massive upper body would be tilting him over unless I can place this foot in a position that makes more sense, like out here, to steady him. Let me bring the fall further down now. Okay. Not too bad. Okay. Now that I've done that, it makes more sense to swivel this foot a little bit to the left. There we go. Because we don't want the knee or the hip joint to be rotating really, really far out. I could do something like try to get it back here behind the body, but we're going to lose the balance if I keep doing that. Okay, so both legs are bent now. So that looks like he came to a dead stop right there, which is maybe better than mid-sneak. Sticking that foot forward and planting it like that gave him a more solid base to kind of push and turn around, and I kind of like that. Let's see if the head and neck are still doing the right thing. I feel like the neck somehow wandered away from the position I'd want it to be. So let's lean it back over this way and then lift the head a little bit again. Maybe tilt it. No. This way. Yeah, because maybe he would end up peering around this way, or maybe he would end up peering over the shoulder this way. You can see how both of those are pretty valid choices. When I do it, I'm leaning my head away to look that way. So almost like a suspicion rather than an alert. He's got so much shoulder and chest, it's hard to get, but I kind of like the image of just peeking over the shoulder like that. Okay. Is he off balance? Not really. He's got a lot of pressure on that back foot, but not so much that I think it's impossible. I like that a bit. I like that less. This would be nice if he wasn't so massive and coming off balance so much. So yeah, I think I want to push it back so that I get kind of a rounding, flat shape around this leg. And then this direction. So I'm kind of checking different angles. I like that leg further out, straighter and further out. Okay. I haven't really done very much with the hands except for pose them as big mittens, but I think you could see how just relaxing the fingers or tensing the fingers up would do a whole lot for the pose. But since they're small details, you don't want to do that early on. Same thing's true with the face. I know 2 of the 3 rigs I gave you guys had faces, and this guy doesn't have one. I chose him for a reason. The face is not important enough when you're doing your first set of posing to even bother with. The face is a detail. Unless our camera is right up here and we're reading subtlety in the eyes or in the twitches of the lips or the jaw or something, it's just not important enough for gross body animation to even consider doing anything in the first pass, really. So pose the face, but do it at the same time as you do your fingers, right? Don't do it right away. If you have to get eye direction, that's different. Sometimes it's important to know if you can keep establishing eye direction, but you definitely don't have to be posing the face with as much detail as you're posing the body, and shouldn't. I think maybe the hips are what's bothering me. I want to get just a little bit back like that. Oh, and I've still got this one locked with the hips, which I didn't think about. I could turn that off at this point, but just wanted to get a little bit more curvature there, tucking the butt down a little. I think that's about sufficient for this example, though, even though there's more to do with the fingers and whatnot and fine-tuning. It's a good example of how we can go about getting full-body emotional poses and the kinds of thought processes that I would go through. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. The last thing I'll mention is just that you should, in order to assess your poses, probably turn off your controllers. Oh, not controllers, your nerves curves. in order to just see the character purely posing, it becomes a little harder to hop between the different keyframes though, because we can't select that stuff. So just click between and then look at your character devoid of all of that mess so that you can judge how well executed your poses are. If you are good at drawing and comfortable with drawing, then taking screenshots and drawing over your character to get an idea of what you would improve. Like right here, I feel that this knee needs to come into the right a little bit, especially from like this angle. Back here it looks okay, but over here it doesn't. And that's something that probably in drawing I would be more likely to realize than posing a 3D model. But just something I noticed that I'd probably bend this in a little bit further. Now it looks a little bit odd with the foot, but it's possible that I would also want to lean this foot a little bit. Or maybe it is rotate. Not sure. I'm just leaning this foot a little bit. It makes it look very dynamic, like he's about to fall over though. So maybe let me lean that back down. It was just something I noticed, something that didn't quite fit as I was rotating around, and I would want to change, although it works from a lot of these angles, just not all of them. Okay, so turn off your controllers towards the ending of your posing to fine-tune things. Maybe if I moved it the other way. I'm getting lost in what I want to accomplish here. Yeah, maybe in line with that is better. Still works on the side, still looks, now it looks better over here, so yeah. But that's a good way to kind of get rid of this visual mess, because sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming and it can be very, very distracting. Okay, keep rotating your camera around. Don't pose from just one position. This one's probably less important, typically directly up or down, but a few of the angles around your character are going to be fairly important. Try looking at them from the back. It can be revealing. And keeping track of where the body mass is centered over. Right now the body mass is over the 2 feet, slightly in front, which I think makes sense in this case, and he can throw his arms out to sort of counterbalance that. Okay. All right, hopefully that was helpful. Good luck doing your character poses, and send me messages on Discord or in comments here if you want in order to get some help.